Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are completing the rest of Essay 1, or Chapter 1, however you want to consider it. This is entitled Good and Evil, Good and Bad, and we finished points number 1 through 11 in the first the previous video, and in the second video we will be completing the rest with points 12 to 17. And with that said, I will go ahead and get started. 12. I cannot refrain at this juncture from uttering a sigh and one last hope. What is it precisely which I find intolerable? That which I alone cannot get rid of, which makes me choke and faint? Bad air, that something misbegotten comes near me, that I must inhale the odor of the entrails of a misbegotten soul. That accepted, what can one not endure in the way of need, privation, bad weather, sickness, toil, solitude? In point of fact, one manages to get over everything. Born as one is to a burrowing and battling existence, one always returns once again to the light. One always lives again one's golden hour of victory. And then one stands as one was born, unbreakable, tense, ready for something more difficult, for something more distant, like a bow stretched but the tauter by every strain. But from time to time do ye grant me, assuming that beyond good and evil there are goddesses who can grant me but one glimpse only of something perfect, fully realized, happy, mighty, triumphant, of something that still gives cause for fear? A glimpse of a man that justifies the existence of a man. A glimpse of an incarnate human happiness that realizes and redeems, for the sake of which one may hold fast to the belief in man. For the position is this: in the dwarfing and leveling of the European man lurks our greatest peril, for it is this outlook which fatigues. We see today nothing which wishes to be greater. We surmise that the process is always still backwards towards something more attenuated, more inoffensive, more cunning, more comfortable, more mediocre, more indifferent, more Chinese, more Christian. Man, there is no doubt about it, grows always better. The destiny of Europe lies even in this, that in losing the fear of man, we have also lost the hope in man, yea, the will to be man. The sight of man now fatigues. What is present-day nihilism if it is not that? We are tired of man. 13. But let us come back to it. The problem of another origin, of the good as the resentful man has thought it out, demands its solution. It is not surprising that the lambs should bear a grudge against the great birds of prey, but that is no reason for blaming the great birds of prey for taking the little lambs. And when the lambs say among themselves, "Those birds of prey are evil, and he who is far removed from being a bird of prey, who is rather its opposite, a lamb, is he not good?" Then there is nothing to cavil at in the setting up of this ideal, though it may also be that the birds of prey will regard it a little sneeringly, and perchance say to themselves, "We bear no grudge against them, these good lambs, we even like them. Nothing is tastier than a tender lamb." To require of strength that it should not express itself as strength, that it should not be a wish to overpower, a wish to overthrow, a wish to become master, a thirst for enemies and antagonisms and triumphs, is just as absurd as to require of weakness that it should express itself as strength. A quantum of force is just such a quantum of movement, will, action. Rather, it is nothing else than that those very phenomena of moving, willing, acting, and only can appear otherwise in the misleading errors of language, and the fundamental fallacies of reason which have become petrified therein, which understands, and understands wrongly, all working as conditioned by a worker, by a subject. And just exactly as the people separate the lightning from its flash, and interpret the latter as a thing done, as the working of a subject, which is called lightning, so also do the popular morality separate strength from the expression of strength, as though behind the strong man there existed some indifferent neutral substratum, which enjoyed a caprice and option as to whether or not it should express strength. But there is no such substratum. There is no being behind doing, working, becoming. The doer is a mere appanage to the action. The action is everything. In point of fact, the people duplicate the doing when they make the lightning lighten. That is a doing. They make the same phenomenon first a cause, and then secondly, the effect of that cause. The scientists fail to improve matters when they say, force moves, force causes, and so on. Our whole science is still, in spite of all its coldness, of all its freedom from passion, a dupe of the tricks of language, and has never succeeded in getting rid of that superstitious changeling, the subject, the atom, to give another instance in such a changeling, just as the Kantian thing in itself. What wonder if the suppressed and stealthily simmering passions of revenge and hatred exploit for their own advantage their belief, and indeed hold no belief with a more steadfast enthusiasm than this, that the strong has the option of being weak, and the bird of prey being a lamb. Thereby do they win for themselves the right of attributing to the birds of prey the responsibilities for being birds of prey, when the oppressed, downtrodden, and overpowered say to themselves with the vindictive guile of weakness, let us be otherwise than the evil, namely, good, and good is everyone who does not oppress, who hurts no one, and does not attack, who does not pay back, who hands over revenge to God, who holds himself, as we do, in hiding, who goes out of the way of evil, and demands, in short, little from life, like ourselves, the patient, the meek, the just. Yet all this, in its cold and unprejudiced interpretation, means nothing more than, once for all, the weak are weak. It is good to do nothing for which we are not strong enough. But this dismal state of affairs, this prudence of the lowest order, which even insects possess, which in a great danger are fain to sham death so as to avoid doing too much, has, thanks to the counterfeiting and self-deception of weakness, come to masquerade in the pomp of an ascetic, mute, and expectant virtue, just as though the very weakness of the weak, that is, forsooth, its being, its working, its whole unique, inevitable, inseparable reality, were a voluntary result, something wished, chosen, a deed, an act of merit. This kind of man finds the belief in a neutral, free-choosing subject necessary from an instinct of self-preservation, of self-assertion, in which every lie is fain to sanctify itself. The subject, or to use popular language, the soul, has perhaps proved itself the best dogma in the world simply because it rendered possible to the horde of mortal, weak, and oppressed individuals of every kind that most sublime specimen of self-deception, the interpretation of weakness as freedom, of being this or being that as merit. 14. Will anyone look a little right into the mystery of how ideals are manufactured in this world? Who has the courage to do it? Come. Here we have a vista opened into these grimy workshops. Wait just a moment, dear Mr. Inquisitive and foolhardy. Your eye must first grow accustomed to this false, changing light. Yes, enough. Now speak. What is happening below down yonder? Speak out. Tell what you see, man of the most dangerous curiosity, for now I am the listener. Quote, I see nothing. I hear the more. It is a cautious, spiteful, gentle whispering and muttering together in all the corners and crannies. It seems to me that they are lying. A sugary softness adheres to every sound. Weakness is turned to merit. There is no doubt about it. It is just as you say. End quote. Further, quote, and the impotence which requites not is turned to goodness, craven baseness to meekness, submission to those whom one hates, to obedience, namely obedience to one of whom they say that he ordered this submission. They call him God. The inoffensive character of the weak, the very cowardice in which he is rich, his standing at the door, his forced necessity of waiting, gain here fine names such as patience, which is called virtue. Not being able to avenge oneself is called not wishing to avenge oneself, perhaps even forgiveness, for they know not what they do. We alone know what they do. They also talk of the love of their enemies, and sweat thereby. Further, quote, they are miserable, there is no doubt about it, all these whisperers and counterfeiters in the corners, although they try to get warm by crouching close to each other, but they tell me that their misery is a favor and distinction given to them by God, just as one beats the dogs one likes best, that perhaps this misery is also a preparation, a probation, a training, that perhaps it is still more something which will one day be compensated and paid back with a tremendous interest in gold, nay, in happiness. This they call blessedness. Further, quote, they are now giving me to understand that not only are they better men than the mighty, the lords of the earth, whose spittle they have got to lick, not out of fear, not at all out of fear, but because God ordains that one should honor all authority. Not only are they the better men, but they also have a better time, at any rate will one day have a better time. But enough, enough, I can endure it no longer. Bad air, these workshops where ideals are manufactured, verily they reek with the crassest lies. Nay, just 1 minute. You are saying nothing about the masterpieces of these virtuosos of black magic, who can produce whiteness, milk, and innocence out of any black you like. Have you not noticed what a pitch of refinement is attained by their chef-d'oeuvre, their most audacious, subtle, ingenious, and lying artist trick? Take care. These cellar beasts full of revenge and hate, what do they make, forsooth, out of their revenge and hate? Do you hear these words? Would you suspect, if you trusted only their words, that you are among men of resentment and nothing else? Quote, I understand. I prick my ears up again. Ah, and I hold my nose. Now do I hear for the first time that which they have said so often. We good, we are the righteous. What they demand they call not revenge, but the triumph of righteousness. What they hate is not their enemy. No, they hate unrighteousness, godlessness. What they believe in and hope is not the hope of revenge, the intoxication of sweet revenge. Sweeter than honey, did Homer call it. But the victory of God, of the righteous God over the godless. What is left for them to love in this world is not their brothers in hate, but their brothers in love, as they say all the good and righteous on the earth. And how do they name that which serves them as a solace against all the troubles of life, their phantasmagoria of their anticipated future blessedness? Quote, how? Do I hear right? They call it the last judgment, the advent of their kingdom, the kingdom of God. But in the meanwhile they live in faith, in love, in hope. Enough. 15. In the faith in what? In the love for what? In the hope of what? These weaklings, they also, forsooth, wish to be strong sometime. There is no doubt about it. Sometime their kingdom also must come. The kingdom of God is their name for it, as has been mentioned. They are so meek in everything. Yet in order to experience that kingdom, it is necessary to live long, to live beyond death. Yes, eternal life is necessary so that one can make up for ever that earthly life, in faith, in love, in hope. Make up for what? Make up for what? Dante, as it seems to me, made a crass mistake when, with his awe-inspiring ingenuity, he placed that inscription over the gate of his hell. Quote, me too made eternal love, end quote. At any rate, the following inscription would have a much better right to stand over the gate of the Christian paradise and its eternal blessedness. Quote, me too made eternal hate, end quote. Granted, of course, that a truth may rightly stand over the gate to a lie. For what is the blessedness of that paradise? Possibly we could quickly surmise it, But it is better that it should be explicitly attested by an authority, who in such matters is not to be disparaged, Thomas of Aquinas, the great teacher and saint. Quote, "The blessed in the kingdom of heaven will behold the punishment of the damned, so that their blessedness will please them all the more." End quote. Or if we wish to hear a stronger tone, a word from the mouth of a triumphant father of the Church, who warned his disciples against the cruel ecstasies of the public spectacles. But why? "Faith offers us much more," says he, the Spectac, c. 29 ss, "something much more stronger. Thanks to the redemption, joys of quite another kind stand at our disposal. Instead of athletes, we have our martyrs. We wish for blood. Well, we have the blood of Christ. But what then awaits us on the day of his return, of his triumph?" And then does he proceed, does this enraptured visionary, quote, "Yes, and there are other sights. That last day of judgment with its everlasting issues, that day unlooked for by the nations, the theme of their derision, when the world hoary with age and all in its many products shall be consumed in one great flame. How vast a spectacle then bursts upon the eye! What there excites my admiration? What my derision? Which sight gives me joy? Which rouses me to exultation? As I see so many illustrious monarchs whose reception into the heavens was now publicly announced, groaning now in the lowest darkness with Jupiter himself, and those too who bore witness of their exultation, governors of provinces too who persecuted the Christian name, in fires more fierce than those with which the days of their pride they raged against the followers of Christ. What world's wise men besides, the very philosophers, in fact, who taught their followers that God had no concern in aught that is sublunary, and were wont to assure them that either they had no souls, or that they would never return to the bodies which at death they had left, now covered with shame before the poor deluded ones, as one fire consumes them. Poets also, trembling not before the judgment seat of Rhadamanthus or Minos, but of the unexpected Christ. I shall have a better opportunity than of hearing the tragedians louder voiced in their own calamity, of viewing the play-actors much more dissolute than in the dissolving flame, of looking upon the charioteer all glowing in his chariot of fire, of beholding the wrestlers not in their gymnasia, but tossing in the fiery billows, unless even then I shall not care to attend to such ministers of sin, in my eager wish rather to fix a gaze insatiable on those whose fury vented itself against the Lord. Quote, "This, I shall say, this is that carpenter's or hireling's son, that Sabbath-breaker, that Samaritan and devil-possessed. This is he whom you purchased from Judas. This is he whom you struck with reed and fist, whom you contemptuously spat upon, to whom you gave gall and vinegar to drink. This is he whom his disciples stole secretly away, that it might be said that he had risen again, or the gardener abstracted, that his lettuces might come to no harm from the crowds of visitants. What quaestor or priest in his munificence will bestow on you the favor of seeing and exulting in such things as these? And yet even now we in a measure have them by faith in the picturings of imagination. But what are the things which eye has not seen, ear has not heard, and which have not so much dimly dawned upon the human heart? Whatever they are nobler, I believe, than circus and both theaters and every race course. 1 Corinthians 2:9, quote, "Credo, circo et utraque cavia." First and fourth row, or according to others, the comic and the tragic stage. Et omni studio gratiora. Perfidum, so stands it written. 16. Let us come to a conclusion. The two opposing values, good and bad, good and evil, have fought a dreadful 1,000-year fight in the world, and though indubitably the second value has been for a long time in the preponderance, there are not wanting places where the fortune of the flight is still undecisive. It can almost be said that in the meanwhile the fight reaches a higher and higher level, and that in the meanwhile it has become more and more intense, and always more and more psychological, so that nowadays there is perhaps no more decisive mark of the higher nature, of the more psychological nature, than to be in that sense self-contradictory, and to be actually still a battleground for those two opposites. The symbol of this fight, written in a writing which has remained worthy of a perusal throughout the course of history up to the present time, is called Rome against Judea, Judea against Rome. Hitherto there has been no greater event than that fight, the putting of that question, that deadly antagonism. Rome found in the Jew the incarnation of the unnatural, as though it were its diametrically opposed monstrosity, and in Rome the Jew was held to be convicted of hatred of the whole human race, and rightly so, insofar as it is right to link the well-being and the future of the human race to the unconditional mastery of the aristocratic values, of the Roman values. What, conversely, did the Jews feel against Rome? One can surmise it from 1,000 symptoms, but it is sufficient to carry one's mind back to the Johannine Apocalypse, that most obscene of all the written outbursts, which has revenge on its conscience. One should also appraise at its full value the profound logic of the Christian instinct, when over this very book of hate it wrote the name of the disciple of love, that selfsame disciple to whom it attributed that impassioned and ecstatic gospel. Therein lurks a portion of truth, however much literary forging may have been necessary for this purpose. The Romans were the strong and aristocratic. A nation stronger and more aristocratic has never existed in the world, has never even been dreamed of. Every relic of them, every inscription enraptures, granted that one can divine what it is that writes the inscription. The Jews, conversely, were that priestly nation of resentment par excellence, possessed by a unique genius for popular morals. Just compared with the Jews, the nations with analogous gifts, such as the Chinese or the Germans, so as to realize afterwards what is first-rate and what is fifth-rate. Which of them has been provisionally victorious, Rome or Judea? But there is not a shadow of doubt. Just consider to whom in Rome itself nowadays you bow down, as though before the quintessence of all the highest values, and not only in Rome, but almost over half the world, everywhere where man has been tamed or is about to be tamed, to 3 Jews as we know and 1 Jewess, to Jesus of Nazareth, to Peter the fisher, to Paul the tent-maker, and to the mother of the aforesaid Jesus named Mary. This is very remarkable. Rome is undoubtedly defeated. At any rate, there took place in the Renaissance a brilliantly sinister revival of the classical ideal, of the aristocratic valuation of all things. Rome herself, like a man waking up from a trance, stirred beneath the burden of the new Judaized Rome that had been built over her, which presented the appearance of an ecumenical synagogue, and was called the Church. But immediately Judea triumphed again, thanks to that fundamentally popular German and English movement of revenge, which is called the Reformation, and taking also into account its inevitable corollary, the restoration of the Church, the restoration also of the ancient graveyard piece of classical Rome. Judea proved yet once more victorious over the classical ideal in the French Revolution, and in a sense which was even more crucial and even more profound, the last political aristocracy that existed in Europe, that of the French 17th and 18th centuries, broke into pieces beneath the instincts of a resentful populace. Never had the world heard a greater jubilation, a more uproarious enthusiasm. Indeed, there took place in the midst of it the most monstrous and unexpected phenomenon. The ancient ideal itself, swept before the eyes and conscience of humanity with all its life, and with unheard-of splendor and in opposition to resentment's lying war cry of the prerogative of the most, in opposition to the will to lowliness, abasement, and equalization, the will to a retrogression and twilight of humanity, there rang out once again, stronger, simpler, more penetrating than ever, the terrible and enchanting counter-war cry of the prerogative of the few. Like a final signpost to other ways, there appeared Napoleon, the most unique and violent anachronism that ever existed, and in him the incarnate problem of the aristocratic ideal in itself. Consider well what a problem it is. Napoleon, that synthesis of monster and Superman. 17. Was it therewith over? Was that greatest of all antitheses of ideals thereby relegated ad acta for all time? Or only postponed for a long time? May there not take place at some time or other a much more awful, much more carefully prepared flaring up of the old conflagration? Further, should not one wish that consummation with all one's strength, will it oneself, demand it oneself? He who at this juncture begins, like my readers, to reflect, to think further, will have difficulty in coming quickly to a conclusion. Ground enough for me to come myself to a conclusion, taking it for granted that for some time past what I mean has been sufficiently clear, what I exactly mean by that dangerous motto which is inscribed on the body of my last book, Beyond Good and Evil. At any rate, that is not the same as beyond good and bad. Note: I avail myself of the opportunity offered by this treatise to express openly and formally a wish which up to the present has only been expressed in occasional conversations with scholars, namely, that some faculty of philosophy should, by means of a series of prize essays, gain the glory of having promoted the further study of the history of morals. Perhaps this book may serve to give a forcible impetus in such a direction. With regard to a possibility of this character, the following question deserves consideration. It merits quite as much the attention of philologists and historians as of actual professional philosophers. Quote, what indication of the history of the evolution of the moral ideas is afforded by philology, and especially by etymological investigation? End quote. On the other hand, it is of course equally necessary to induce physiologists and doctors to be interested in these problems, of the value of the valuations which have prevailed up to the present. In this connection, the professional philosophers may be trusted to act as the spokesmen and intermediaries in these particular instances, after, of course, they have quite succeeded in transforming the relationship between philosophy and physiology and medicine, which is originally one of coldness and suspicion, into the most friendly and fruitful reciprocity. In point of fact, all tables of values, all the thou shalts known to history and ethnology, need primarily a physiological, at any rate in preference to a psychological elucidation and interpretation. All equally require a critique from medical science. The question, what is the value of this or that table of values and morality, will be asked from the most varied standpoints. For instance, the question of valuable for what can never be analyzed with sufficient nicety. That, for instance, which would evidently have value with regard to promoting in a race the greatest possible powers of endurance, or with regard to increasing its adaptability to a specific climate, or with regard to the preservation of the greatest number, would have nothing like the same value if it were a question of evolving a stronger species. Engaging values, the good of the majority and the good of the minority are opposed standpoints. We leave it to the naivete of English biologists to regard the former standpoint as intrinsically superior. All the sciences have now to pave the way for the future task of the philosopher. This task being understood to mean that he must solve the problem of value, that he has to fix the hierarchy of values. This is the end of Essay 1, Part 2 of The Genealogy of Morals by Friedrich Nietzsche. Thank you for listening.